Hello and welcome to Quick Take TA here on Landy's Crypto Corner. Today is August 2nd, 2024, and we're going to follow up with our video from Wednesday where we did talk about this potential move down to around $60,000. Now you can see that Bitcoin has hit our major downside target area. It actually pinned it nearly perfectly there. Between 60,000 and 60,300 on the top side of this risk zone. Bitcoin actually just tagged it nearly perfectly there with the low coming in at 60,240 and that actual close open structure over here coming in at around that 60,263. Now, that zone is roughly around 60,000 to 60,300. So nice pin of that area so far. And that's, born off the back of what we were talking about on Wednesday when the Wednesday closure came inside of this safe zone here between 64 and 65.5. The criteria was that if you start seeing Bitcoin trading below $64,000, keep an eye on the range lows here, somewhere around 60,200 to 300. Because below there, we were looking between $62,000 and $63,000 as a general area of interest. And we did see that. That was the top side of these candles over here. We saw that area tagged, but Bitcoin got bought up pretty aggressively. Looked pretty good. It even spiked 65.5. And in this case, it rejected coming into the Friday candle. And the Friday candle was an absolute disaster for the bulls here because we now have a broken trend. When we already had a lower high, now we can only have a lower low. So we have two pieces of, and this is a lower high close. Technically, it's a higher high wick, lower high close. Actually, you know what? No, I'm sorry. That's actually a higher high close. So this is just a trend break close. And the big area to watch out for, as I'd mentioned on Wednesday, was anywhere below $62,000. We're looking at a zone of like around 60 to 62 roughly. But if $60,000 or so is lost, please be aware of the bottom side of the risk zone, which is also the top side of the danger zone here at 58.4. Any closures below there, and we're looking right back to the previous lower low as it relates to the most recent low of the range. The previous lower low was that area at 56,500 that we were watching closely when Bitcoin approached that area prior. Of course, Bitcoin put in a lower low down there at 53.5. But if 56,500 is in the cards, you're going to see it on any kind of medium-term time frame closures below 58.4. If that area is dropped, then I would look to 56.5. If we did see that area lost, I'm looking right back to the lows and possibly lower into target one of distribution. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that Bitcoin is going to go into a full daily distribution, but I did want to call this out because there is this downtrend line that is nearly perfect. You're probably seeing, the broadening wedge pattern traders calling this out, but there is confluence. Now, I don't care for patterns, and in fact, I actively avoid showing them to you, because they're only really relevant when they intersect with horizontals. Because when no order book actually gives a shit about patterns. So just to let you know about that. Market makers don't either. They're going with where the liquidity is. So in this case, if we did see 56,500, I am looking right back to the lows. Equal lows, lower lows, fair game from there. That's at 53.5. That's a front run of our target one of distribution, which is this area from February that was tested. Now, this is a historical area from 2021. So there's a weekly swing high from 2021 at $53,000 that was tested back in February. That historical area did act as resistance, but then there was two weekly closes at about 50,800 to 51.8, and that held up the lows back here in February. Now, those historical closes are coming from 2021 and 2022, I believe. I have to go double check. Maybe we can look at that in just a moment on my long-term time frame chart. But that area was a historical area of support and resistance. Bitcoin tagged it as resistance and then found it as support before going on to make the new all-time high. If Bitcoin were to start closing below 53,500 and then subsequently start closing candles on the daily and higher term timeframes below $53,000, that's where I would look for a daily distribution further into this zone, making that $50,000 target a viable one. Anywhere below there, then we start looking to 48 to around 45. Yes, the actual monthly that this is referencing is the monthly closing lower high from 2022 that locked in that bear market. So realistically, that closes at 45.5 and the wick is at 48,240. Just generally, I'm going to refer to it as 45 to $48,000. That'd be the secondary target. And yes, a lot of people, even if this did start to distribute, they'd be calling it bear market and everything's over. And I do think it would just go into a reaccumulation. I'll give you my base thesis for that in just a moment. But as it stands right now, with all of that bearish information out of the way, with the broken uptrend now and all of these possible downtrending targets, let's talk about the upside. Bitcoin is getting a nice lower term time frame bounce off of our top side of the risk zone here at around 60,000 to 60,300, and that's fine. It can even dig in here a little bit. It's when you start to see closures on the daily below here that it becomes problematic for the daily in terms of continuation to the downside. But in this case, looks good if it's bouncing here and closes above here on the dailies. Now, if it can regain, I would give this actually, man, this is kind of the same areas. This high over here that was holding price up on a close at around 62,800 to the red line here at around 63, 2 to 300. So about a $500 range between this close open at 62.8 to around, we'll call it 63.3. Then I would start to look back to the safe zone up here at around $64,000. And then, of course, back above there, we're looking right back to 65.5. And then above there, 67,300, which is this high over here. And then we can possibly look at price running back to the local highs at $68,000 to $70,000. Now, Bitcoin has been playing very accurate. Excuse me, chewing on my words and then coughing them up. It's been playing very technically, I should say. And for those of you that have just recently joined, you might be like, wow, like Landy's some kind of crazy price predictor. No, I'm just calling out the areas of interest. So, when I talked about the $68,000 to $70,000, it's not going to hit $70,000 like it did every time. A lot of times you see wicks like this where the overhead resistance was at 71,500 and the wicks went to $72,000. These are just generalized areas of support and resistance that we're calling out here. And Bitcoin has been playing very, very technically when approaching these levels. That tells you that there's a lot of professionals in this market that are driving this price action behind the scenes by throwing their weight around. And, in this case, no, it's not news driven. The market already told us that there was a nice high up here, and that if it put another high in and did not break out above this high and into this zone on a closing basis, then it was more likely to come back down and test, which is why we were concentrating on the higher low structure leading into this potential break. And of course, we got the potential break and then the strike to the next zone. So, it's nothing too crazy. It's pretty fairly straightforward analysis. I can get really complex for you, but there's no need to. This works and it's very tradable. So in this case, let's go ahead and look at something that I got asked about earlier today, and that is capitulation. Bitcoin is no longer in minor capitulation, and often when we see this buy signal flash, we see a pretty big drop off in price. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because if we go over here and we look at this eye-searingly bright website that caprioli.com has, well, we can see that Bitcoin back here, when it exited the capitulation, which is basically trading, getting both price and minor price and actual Bitcoin spot price back above the total production cost, then it exits capitulation. So we saw here is After the halving, we're getting difficulty adjustments down, which brings the floor of the electrical cost down for miners, therefore lowering production cost. When Bitcoin started trading below production cost back here, just post halving, it entered a capitulation phase. And what have we seen every time that it exits a capitulation phase post halving? Well, we see this, like what it did in 2020. We saw that it pumped up, exited capitulation phase, and then came right back in for a retest at the top side of production cost there. Where is Bitcoin right now? Well, production cost is officially at 62,400. It's testing inside the top of production cost. Where things don't look so rosy is if Bitcoin begins a daily distribution towards its electrical cost. You can see that the floor for electricity is actually moving up now, as there has been a little bit more competition on the network for blocks. So we have seen that electrical cost basis rise a bit here again as difficulty has risen to, now we're at about 44,300. I expect this to be somewhere around that monthly distribution target too, if Bitcoin were to start heading that way. And that would be around that $45,000 monthly to $48,000 area that I talked about a moment ago. I'm not necessarily looking for that to happen right now. Bitcoin is still in range. So it's only if it breaks down below 56,500. I will tell you that it's not going to look good for bulls, though, if 60K breaks. We'll look at that on the weekly here in just a moment. We could see that just in the prior halving to 2020, we have data for our 2016 halving, where Bitcoin actually rode the actual electrical cost all the way up. It kept getting a markup before there was a nice spike up in price and then crashed back down into electrical cost. We saw, activity drop on the network quite sharply around that time, and therefore you had two big legs down in the difficulty adjustment, therefore electrical cost dives and production cost dives. We then saw it break out of that capitulation, and what did it do? Came right back in and retested before going on its mega run. So, don't be scared. Even if we were to see a daily distribution, which I don't, it's a little too early to call that, as Bitcoin has bounced, $1,600, bounced quite aggressively off of that $60,000 area, and it's a weekend lower liquidity. So we'll see what the weekend holds coming into close. And that's actually what we're going to talk about next. But first, let's go ahead and address this. Bitcoin has spiked now the bearish control zone. We mentioned this on Wednesday's video that the bearish control zone at the time, this is updated since then, it's 60,800. At the time, it was like around 60,400 or 500. So basically right at the top side of our risk zone on the daily. Yes, in fact, yeah, because we were talking about this being at the 50 read, it spiked it didn't close near it, but it spiked that bearish control zone number or target from Wednesday. My apologies, man. Got to cough it out. I'm sorry for your ears. Spending all week talking on Spaces events, and this is what happens to my voice. My apologies. Let's go ahead and take a look at momentum real quick, because what I would like to see is if Bitcoin can bounce over the weekend, is possibly turn Stoke up by Monday. That might be wishful thinking. But if bulls can, kind of go sideways and up from here and allow the Stoke to close the Saturday and possibly the weekly candle without moving further down, maybe it can salvage itself and get a turn heading into Monday, Tuesday or something. But at this rate, 66,800 is pretty far away from price action. So, for a weekend especially, who knows? Weirder things have happened. We've seen illiquid weekends for extended periods of time, and then all of a sudden we get really big legs up over the weekend. Now, this is where things are a little bit more concerning for the bulls. And this is because we have on our weekly chart, these won't line up. My apologies. It's set for the daily. We have our high, got our higher low. We have our lower high, lower low. And if Bitcoin closes anywhere below last week's low, that is at 63,412. Well, we're looking at this being a weekly bearish engulfing candle that dropped that scary looking shooting star there, or evening star if you like. Doesn't really matter what you call it. It's not a pretty candle for the bulls in this case without getting continuation this week. So this is looking for lower prices when looking at the weekly chart. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to go for the full breakdown. Let's go ahead and get rid of that trend line. Let's get rid of our accumulation distribution zones and just show you this is not the best look, bulls. You better pull your bull tails out of your buttholes and get moving to the upside soon, or turn this into a lower high, higher low structure, which is what we would want to see, right? So off of a key level like that, that 60,000 that it just spiked, it could lock in a high and then immediately turn around and put in a higher low. That's actually what would be the preferable scenario for the bulls, is for this to be, your broadening wedge or your bull flag or whatever you'd like to call it, and then get some higher lows that do not pass this lower low. Otherwise, it's continuation down, into these weeklies over here. Of course, that's our 53 to $50,000, and then possibly the top side. There's no technical supports there, but from this area on the way up, they're a little bit further down, but we have the historical support resistance zone that you would want to see flipped at around that. That's a weekly, it's at 46, but the monthly at 45 to that 48, 46, 500, splitting the difference there on the weekly. So in general, we have this downtrend. This would keep, this just be another lower high, which is, in trend. In this case, anywhere below, again, 53,500, I'm going to call it. It's 53,412, but around 53.5. Otherwise, it's looking like it wants to come down and test. Let's look at momentum, though, because the weekly momentum is pointed to the upside. This is not a very strong signal by any stretch of the imagination for momentum. Okay, so this would cross down on Sunday if we did see a close anywhere below 60,685. That's actually pretty important to understand. Being right around the edge of the bearish control zone for a regular stoke like this, it's not far from it. And then across down into it, we're looking for lower prices if it does cross back down. Buy signals on hash ribbons be damned. There's nothing very, very bullish going on right now on the weekly, except for a counter trend signal in that the regular stoke is pointed up. Doesn't mean a whole lot. It's residual from this low over here, and then the candle that it put in and closed on the 15th, coming into the back half of July and the first half of August here, or the first couple of days of August. August is typically a pretty dumpy month anyway, but this could shape up to be that actual broadening wedge if it was to go and distribute further or test further down, go into like a daily distribution. I wouldn't be afraid of it again, like what I just showed you for the electrical cost. I don't see Bitcoin going too much further down than that anyway at worst. And as it stands, it's still in the middle of the range, or it's on the bottom end of the range as it stands right now. So nothing too crazy. I think that's where I'm going to leave it. I don't want to be any more complex than that, actually. There's not much more to show you other than maybe bands. This is pushing the lower first. You do not want to see it closing below the lower first. 61.8, 61.7 is the lower first. I would want to give it room. I'd actually like to see this close above 61.8. Maybe there's one other thing we could do here. Maybe pull a fib and see how that lines up with some of our major areas. This was the 382. Yeah, honestly, I wouldn't want to see this drop in the 50% of the range at 62,850. So that would put it right back at that daily that I was just talking about here. That's this daily lower high from the prior downtrend. So from the 72 to 53.5, that lower high closes right at that 62,800, 850 area. So I would want to see that regained. This isn't quite expansion mode yet, but we did get a close open underneath the lower second on the daily. So if we saw Saturday candle close below there, that would actually be confirmation of further downside expansion until it can regain that lower second. So again, we're probably looking at around 62,850. So it's got to regain this lower high over here. Of course, we have a nice base of wicks from the range just above, and yeah, that's what I'd be looking for, at least for the bulls to get started. If you want to be conservative, that 62,800 area that I talked about at the very beginning of the video to the upside there, and then it can start maybe run the bands the other way and take out those highs. We'll see. Maybe one more thing to look at here is that the last time that we saw, yeah, this was, mm, hmm, yeah, this is not pretty. And I don't want to see it closing below that area that it just spiked. So I'm not even going to address the my thoughts on this right now for the for the actual RSI there. So we're going to leave it at that. Please join me on Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, 1 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. UTC for the Landy's Crypto Corner Spaces event, episode 2. And I've got 2 special guests coming up. I've got Reese and Peace Love Music. Reese, I'm gonna have him talk about some of his projects and transitioning, from other blockchains to, and he does physical media as well, but from other blockchains to Bitcoin layer 1 and layer 2. Peace Love Music has got a podcast that he just started that's covering, kind of the events in the ordinals and Bitcoin layer 1 and Bitcoin layer 2 project space. It's very cool stuff that he's got going over there. I believe he had mentioned that was part of the D Grants program over there on Stacks. So cool stuff. Gonna talk with them for a little bit, talk about markets a little bit, address a little bit more of the Bitcoin strategic reserve bill that was proposed by Cynthia Lummis, and how that might relate to another bill that was also put forward by her and Senator Gillibrand about stables and what my thoughts are regarding that. And then maybe, follow up, of course, a little bit of an early follow up before the Macro Mondays video that will come after close on Monday. But I will talk about where the markets are in that Spaces event as well. You can go ahead to my X feed here and scroll down a bit, and you will see the event kind of details, and then you can set a reminder for that event. But other than that, you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, and evening, no matter where you are in the world. Please trade safe. Please trade safe, and of course, as always, stay safe. Ooh, my voice nearly cutting out a few times already, but you all have a wonderful weekend as well, and I will talk to you next week. Thanks so much. Landy out.